thanks everyone for coming. It's going to be a great afternoon, and we'll move forward. And I'd like to introduce Mark Zuban.
Thank you. All right, is everybody in here loaded with energy? I hear those electrons flowing. Okay. Thank you for joining us today. This is a terribly important event. This was started in 2009, and the mission was pretty simple. You know, this looked like a tsunami on the horizon we needed to address. So we are at the point of taking significant action. If you look at the leadership, look who's in the room. I think we've got a lot of attention. I just want to talk about a few of the benchmarks that we've looked at to say, you know, why are we doing this? And if you look at what the John and team, I'm talking about Marty and Derek and others, basically took a look at what data is available. If you look out to 2020, if we're not careful, if we don't take action that applies to our network specific to the problems we have to solve, not problems that somebody else is trying to solve for themselves, we can make a significant improvement if we look at the energy rise relative to linear use, industry competition, what we can do with Energy 2020. We may have a significant edge on the applications and problems we're trying to solve relative to the solutions at hand. We're talking about APSIS, Adaptive Power Interface Specifications. Think of a network that lives on the pulse of traffic. If there's no traffic, why are we burning any energy? If you look at data centers today, they're drawing probably 3 to 5 to 7 megawatts in some cases. That's a consistent power consumption, pretty consistent, and it's not necessarily based on traffic. Think about comatose modes, sleep modes, all the things we can do, but have a holistic network that can apply these assumptions relative to the network and hardware specifications to adopt this kind of thinking. If we look at some of the other trends that if we don't take action, this is all about not taking action, right? If you look at the rise in the bandwidth requirement relative to data out in 2020, if you look at the power consumption to do it, total energy cost, it's running pretty parallel. The problem is this becomes a huge economic barrier to competitiveness. Then how do we modify this kind of behavior? How do we modify the technology to support the premise of we can do a lot better? That's Energy 2020. This is a huge event that this industry can lead and drive where we want to be in a competitive environment. We also have scaling for success. It's not going to happen by itself. It's got to be an organized process, right? We're looking at some of the critical measures, and by the way, there's actually a larger number. How do we baseline and measure where we are today? You've got to have some benchmarks as far as improvements, right? Operations and performance criteria, reliability and technology and efficiency and alternatives. We basically have where are we today, what's a near-term solution, what's a far-term solution, and capture those in an industry forum that allows us to take action in a relatively large scale. I'm talking about a relatively large scale that's including just about all major MSOs with passion, not just a toe in the water. And also we're looking for continued vendor participation to help drive this. From a vendor participation, if you're not a member of the standards activity in 2020, you're going to be on the outside looking in. And some of these specifications may be embedded in purchase agreements in the future. The only way we're going to do this to scale is make sure the hardware is consistent with the objectives, and this should be spelled out very clearly in the future. So I want to make sure that I've framed this appropriately. John has taken the chair position, and one of the things I love about John, he's going to get it done, he's going to take no prisoners, and this is going to be done in a way that it will be effectively deployed. And I mean that seriously. We cannot fool around with this. We need to focus. It's a 5-year plan that I think has been well thought through, and John is a guy that I have the trust that will be able to implement and get this thing done. John?
Thank you, Mark. So, Mark, thank you very much for all of those kind words, but the reality is that, in fact, I don't get anything done without a lot of you in the room, our MSO colleagues, our technology partners, and everybody. So it's really important. I'm delighted that all of you are here. I'm delighted to be the chair of Energy 2020. This is an important day. A number of the MSO community technical folks have been sort of working on what I'm about to share with you, and I'd like to sort of frame the overall initiative, tell you about that, and then, of course, turn it over to Teresa and our esteemed panel, who's got a lot more content about it. This is a big day. And I think this is really important. And Mark started to frame why it's important, but I want to share more about the initiative and what we're really trying to do here. So not unlike anything we do in SCTE, this is about inviting all of our partners in the community to help us. These are, problems that we see emerging on the horizon. You think about the network, all the cloud services, everything a lot of the operators are doing already, the things you're hearing about, and you start to extrapolate that. It's not as if we're in a crisis today, but if we keep operating the way we've been operating, we could end up in a place that's not all that attractive as it relates to energy and powering all these experiences for our consumers and our businesses. So we're obviously going to call upon our technology partners, which is a big part of today, to bring some of you into the room here, talk about this, and it's really a beginning about going forward in the way the SCT has in the past with the operators, our technology partners, and there's already been some initiatives that we're starting in some of the innovative startup and through academia, as well as some NSFNet grants that we're working on. So this is going to be very much glued together through the SCTE and Energy 2020, and I'm really delighted to be a part of it. So a little bit about our vision of what this is. I mean, clearly we want to sustain and improve the reliability of our network. There's no doubt in my mind that the MSO community operates very reliable networks, but we don't want to give up on that at all. We want the reliability to increase. We want to enable accelerated growth. I think a lot of the operators know and have experienced, somewhere between 40 and 55% CAGR on everything that, in fact, is growing in the network. So this is a daunting growth curve when you have big networks like the MSOs do, and bring that together. Clearly some successful solutions for us and customers. We wanted to define some energy standards around next generation. And I'll put a few words on that in the future, but there are next-gen pieces of equipment that are already in alpha and beta, or already measured out and coming through. But I think some of the strategic initiatives that really play into the 2020 initiative are about the next-gen gear. What are we doing around creating capabilities, but with more energy efficiencies? And then, of course, unifying a vision across the industry. So I think that industry vision is really important, that we're all skating to the same place. We're doing it in a way where it helps our technology partners not fragment their R&D and where they invest. I would like very much for what we're doing here to end up being an industry destination, and we all get there together. So the group who's been working on this for a little over a year has laid down some ambitious goals. And I think, these are goals that are really important to think about. They're aggressive, we understand that. We live in the world today, but what are the kinds of things we think will materially change some of the energy curves that Mark shared with you? So we want to reduce power consumption by at least 20% on a unit basis. And I think the simplistic way to think about that is if you had a device today that was performing a certain function and features at a level of capacity, how do we have the same capacity and feature set and take 20% of the energy consumption out of that? We want to reduce energy costs at least 25%, again, on a unit basis, which is an important part of our business. The energy costs with what we do continue to rise, and it's an important part of our planning. We also want to reduce grid dependency, and we want to do that through probably a number of technologies, including solar, fuel cell, and many others that we'll innovate on. But I think there's opportunities here over time to be in a place where perhaps at least 10% of our energy consumption is not grid dependent. Maybe the grid is a backup configuration when we get to 2020. And we also want to optimize our technical facilities for at least a 20% improvement across that. So when we really break it down, how are we approaching this? There's a couple of work threads that we think we all need to work on together. One is more tactical. And I know Tony and Terry talked about this in their opening comments, that the SCTE, sharing of information across the MSOs and our technology partners. And I think a lot of the tactics that we're talking about is we are where we are today. How do we look at all of the energy initiatives across the community and get best practices happening across a greater set of the operators and the capabilities in the production environment? So whether it's fleet management, whether it's powering the HFC, whether it's data centers with hot and cold dials, cooling with ambient, what are the kinds of things that we want to do? When we control a facility, do we have controls where we're looking at cycle times and making sure that we don't have too many cycles of some of the heavy drawing equipment in a data center all at the same time? So it's an ambitious set of capabilities across the whole core network and its infrastructure, right? From the access network all the way back into all the things that we're doing with cloud. So how do we look at best practices? I know from the little time that I've spent on this in the last year, there are many initiatives that various MSOs have gone deep in. And how do we bring that best practice into a catalog? How do we share that across our community? How do we work with what we have today and drive some of these results and begin to achieve our 2020 objectives? Strategically, when we think out 2020, we're really spending more time thinking about next-gen gear and what are the types of things that we can do to deliver the added capacity at feature parity and do that with the same kind of performance we have today, but look for ways for breakthrough thinking, look for ways to actually bring a tremendous amount of capacity without doing the linear density play that we've run for the last couple of decades. I think density is an important part of the playbook. It's not the only part of the playbook. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that with an ambitious goal here on the next slide. The other piece is some measurements. You know, one of the things I think we need to do as an industry is work together on what are the standards that we're going to measure in terms of terabytes per watt, so that we can create some standards across the industry, how that's going to be measured, and be able to benchmark and then track our progress across some of these improvements in next-gen equipment. So there's a lot of work to be done in those types of standards, get agreement across the community, and then drive those standards as a measurement and make sure that we're all using apples to apples comparison. We're looking at these kinds of things on different pieces of the infrastructure, you know, whether it's a routing and switching piece of gear, whether it's a storage array, whatever it is, that we're starting to use these metrics where we can create energy saver-like benchmarks against what we do. But in the spirit of ambition, let me throw a provocative challenge out to our technology partners, and we're glad you're here. Some of us who are deploying some of the highest end equipment today, and I really don't mean to pick on anyone, I just want to share a data point. You know, some of our infrastructure today in some of these core centers, given that we've built a lot of capacity and run the linear density playbook for about 2 decades, when I look at what's happened in some of our facilities, and I know a lot of the operators' facilities, you know, you look at a core piece of connectivity gear, a router, and today we're actually plumbing 1,000 amps into that bay. And I know a lot of people remember when you put 1,000 amps into a small hub and it powered the whole hub. Now we're putting that into a bay. The weight of some of this equipment starts to create reinforcements on floors and freight elevators to move it around. You think about some of the extra cooling that needs to be generated on this equipment. So this is an area where I think traditionally and properly and successfully, we've run the density playbook. And I think what we really want to do is focus on an optimal density and think about game-changing things. So here's the challenge to our technology partners. You think about the component that you deliver to this industry and how you do it. How do we achieve 10 times the capacity? Feature parity, performance parity, in the same environmental footprint today. And I think that's going to cause us to rethink how we think about this in the next-gen gear. And it's something where density will play a role, but it's optimal density. I think we have to start thinking about what's in the electrical space or the electrical plane and what can be moved to the optical plane in a piece of equipment, in a board, those kinds of things. So Mark talked about moving electrons. This tries to move more things to photons as best we can. And that's just one piece of the playbook. And I think this is an area where we want to challenge all of our partners to be disruptive, to think about how to achieve this 10x capacity and do that within the framework that already today we have as an environmental footprint. We don't want to keep increasing this environmental footprint. We're going to be in a place where we'll need cranes to put equipment in the head ends in 10 years, and we'll need to have a power plant next to the rack. And I think we want to really, really think about this. So there's the challenge of the day. We want to throw the gauntlet down. We have a great panel, and Teresa Hennessy, who joined Comcast 3 years ago, is going to moderate that panel. Teresa brings a tremendous amount of experience in engineering and ops in the telco industry, as well as the internet industry, and now with Comcast for the last 3 years. So she's going to take us through the panel and do that. So with that, I'd like to just extend again my thanks for all of you being here. Look forward to working with all of you on these challenges. Unfortunately, I bring a challenge and lots of questions. I don't have all the answers, and I think that's where all of the intellectual capability in this room, outside of this room, and our partners, really have to solve this problem. So with that, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Teresa.